Interest is the one of the greatest bands of humanity. The Great Depression of 1927, Black Swan event of 1987, and dot-com crisis of 2000 are all major economic crises that hurt the world economy. False credit ratings for the big corporations, boom and collapse of the shadow banking system, and a commodity bubble are the causes of the current financial crisis.
The next of today's speakers, insha'Allah, is our dear Sheikh M. Muhammad Akbar from India. A brief background about the Sheikh. M. Muhammad Akbar is a well-known Muslim da'i, worker, author and speaker on Islam from the South Indian state of Kerala. He is a physics graduate and has distinguished himself as perhaps the most noted da'wah activist in the city of Kerala with his innovative approaches in introducing Islam and conducting speeches, seminars and debates with scholars of other religions as well as atheists and communists. His programs are noted for active participation by non-Muslim scholars as well as the general public. Sheikh M. Muhammad Akbar is the founder and director of the Da'wah organization Niche of Truth. He is also the managing director of Peace Education Foundation and the editor of the Malayalam monthly Sneha Samvadam, which stands out in presenting a modern perspective in all issues with comparative religion, interreligious dialogues, polemics, apologetics, and Islamic perspectives on various walks of life such as morality, law, history, feminism, economics, etc., as well as answering allegations against Islam. So I would like to invite to take to the podium to address us on the topic, the financial crisis and Islamic analysis, Sheikh M. Muhammad Akbar from India.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qala ja'alni ala qasa'inil ardi inni hafizun alim. Brothers and sisters, the topic assigned on me in this peace conference is Islamic analysis of the current financial crisis. You have already heard the reflections on the Islamic solutions of the world financial crisis by the world's #1 expert of Islamic economics, Dr. Hussein Hamid Hassan. Considering the width and depth of the subject, as well as the time constraints of this conference, I'm just going through my paper prepared on this topic. Bangladesh-born Amartya Sen wrote The Argumentative Indian in 2005, 7 years after winning the Nobel Prize in Economics. His purpose seems to have been to condemn the communal violence fueled by the new Hindu cultural chauvinism as foreign to Indian history and identity, and to advocate for a return to native traditions of intellectual pluralism and public debate. Yet many of his arguments remain thoroughly relevant in our contemporary world, India and elsewhere. Sen concludes that the virtue of any economic argument or principle is really determined by its moral merit, that is, by its ultimate consequences for people and creation. He warns us, as well, many financial theories that do good on paper may well be detrimental to society when put into practice. My contention is that what Sen is saying ought to be extended to the economic principles practiced by most of the world today. Economics and the rest of us should evaluate the worth of these policies not exclusively by their detached numerical accuracy, but first and the foremost by the morality of their fundamental impact on people's lives. Our economic theories and practices should be judged on the basis of the quantum social welfare they generate. Do they help or hurt the most vulnerable among us? Do they free the common man and woman or enslave them? Do they stimulate human integration in society and creation while preserving the life, liberty, and individual choice and dignity of man, beast, and earth? Or do they corrode the structures of communal life and erode the natural, delicate balances that God set for all things? When we assess generally accepted modern economic theories by this standard, we must accept that it has been a failure, an utter failure. The mathematical and statistical equations of its conjunctions may all be accurate, but their definitive results have led to catastrophic social instability, egregious exploitation and persecution, and suffering on a scale so steep and pervasive as to be at once unfathomable but unmistakable. According to the data provided by the experts from our affluent capitalist countries, the results of the accumulating debt mandated by the present economic system is nearly 7 million dead children in underdeveloped countries every year due to preventable starvation and an unconscionable lack of proper medical facilities. That's about 20,000 needless deaths of helpless human beings every single day. Imagine the death of my or your own child for no other reason than his or her life is held cheaper than some banker's silk tie. The same system is also the culprit behind the single greatest period decline in history of the only thing it claims to be focused on, increasing per capita income. Take Somalia, for instance, the most obvious nation in need of wealth per person rise. The average Somali's income, already small, has shrunk by nearly a third, from about $891 to just $600 within a span of 40 years. That's the very period in which the worldly philosophies promise heaven on earth for all people if we just eject God from the world. Do we wonder then at the emergence of piracy in so economically plundered and unsustainable a country as Somalia? The astounding fact that many times more people have been killed in the last century than in all prior human history combined is a single most devastating indictment of the nature of today's political economic system. Nor can this be statistically airbrushed by population arguments. Ever-increasing crime rate, an alarming rise in the number of failed families, a surge in the number of beds in psychiatric wards, a growing mafia culture, and steep decline in the moral and ethical values across the board are the byproducts of a financial system not only unable but to structure to do anything substantial for the welfare for the very societies that have propagated in the world for their own lopsided benefit. On top of these mounting social ailments come the meltdown of the financial markets and dreaded recession. The loud cries of those who have lost their homes, jobs, luxuries fill the already disturbed social air. Investment experts and economic scholars, till recently gloating over the accuracy of their predictions and projections, now claim shall shock in our present perpetuous economic plunge. Most still account for it as an unforeseeable black swan event, an improbable occurrence of extreme social impact. The meeting of the G20 leaders as the summit held in Washington, November 14 to 15, 2008, headlined as Financial Markets and the World Economy, attempted to discuss the root causes of the emergency of the serious challenges to the world economy and financial markets. The leaders endeavored to itemize those underlying reasons for the economic plague threatening the world. Here is the conclusion. During a period of strong global growth, growing capital flows and prolonged stability, Earlier this decade, market participants sought higher yields without an adequate appreciation of the risk and failed to exercise proper due diligence. Policymakers, regulators, and supervisors in some advanced countries did not adequately appreciate and address the risks building up in financial markets, keep pace with the financial innovation, or take into account the systematic ramification of domestic regulatory actions. Major underlying factors to the current situation were, among others, inconsistent and insufficiently coordinated economic outcomes. The summit resolved to take strong remedial actions to put a halt to this crisis. The strong and significant actions planned to stimulate economics are as follows: provide liquidity, strengthen the capital of financial institutions, protect saving and deposits, address regulatory deficiencies, unfreeze credit markets, and try to ensure that international financial institutions to provide critical support for the global economy. The joint statement made at the end of the meeting bore a note of cautious optimism, but thus far the hopes of these leaders are not yet being translated into reality that adequately relieves the people. Time perhaps tell us differently, but that hope seems as risky as the financial practices that got us here. Growth of the housing bubble, easy credit conditions, subprime lending, predatory lending, deregulation, increased debt burden or over-leveraging, financial innovation and complexity, false credit ratings for the big corporations, boom and collapse of the shadow banking system, and a commodity bubble are the causes of the current financial crisis, according to the economists of the capitalistic countries. But are these the symptoms or the root causes? John Bellamy Foster, editor of Monthly Review New York, John Bogle, founder of the famed United States investment management company, the Vanguard Group, and Egyptian economist Samir Amin say that the current financial crisis is merely a symptom of another deeper crisis, which is the systematic crisis of capitalism itself. If not, why capitalism exhibits crisis so often? The bankers' panic of 1907, the Great Depression of 1927, the Black Swan event of 1987, and dot-com crisis of 2000 are all major economic crises that hurt the world economy, and all were more or less made in the USA, the flagship of capitalism. The economists and statesmen of the United States and other G20 nations are trying to analyze the present crisis and find a solution to it, standing within the parameters of their present system. This in itself could make them unable to see the root causes of the problem. Unless they see things in a broader perspective, they will not be able to fully realize the origins of the malady that has afflicted the world. It is here that insight into Islamic and economic principles in relation to the present economic crisis become relevant. Islam is the only religion in the world that less comprehensive economic beliefs of its own. The principles established by Islam as a part of its way of life have already proved successful in practical reality. Here are few things that a serious consideration of revealed economic morality would end in our capitalist world. First and foremost, the unremitting avoidance of acknowledging that there is a sole creator who decrees for man and the world and who is humankind's individual and collective judge. Revealed to this, it would end the unspoken secular moratorium on openly reflecting singly and together what this means for us as individuals and as societies. Second, Islam's economic revelation would reassign greed in this life to its deservedly shameful place in the darkened corners of society and replace it with ethics of liberality and kindness, generosity and charity. Third, Islam's economic revelation would reattach morality to wealth, and this would necessarily lead to a reassertion of two related ethics lost in capitalist society, modesty and abstinence. And here we come to a significant challenge, for modesty is irrevocably connected to chastity, sexual modesty, and the alteration of dress, all of which have everything to do with marriage and the reassertion of families, rights of the state, and specifically paternal rights over that of the corporation. Islam empowers the individual conscience and reduces the hold of others on one, as well as establishes moderation as a prime ethic in life. Islam's economics would in a heartbeat stop the spread of worthless debt notes, otherwise known as money as in currency, and terminate the system of interest, which are the evil underpinnings of the capitalist enterprise. Truth be told, these two are the root cause of the crisis going on in the capitalist hemisphere and the world. When we say that the spread of worthless money and the interest-based system are the root causes, capitalism itself becomes the real defendant. Gold and silver have been cornerstones of the world's economic and wealth storage systems right from the earliest times. Even after the arrival of the barter system, men used to trade their merchandise by calculating its worth in gold or silver. When coins were introduced into the system, they were initially made of gold or silver. In due course, banks came into being, and they issued paper receipts equivalent to the value of the gold or silver deposited with them. These receipts were the foreigners of the currency that we use today. Although in modern times, paper money has no intrinsic value, its acceptability originally depended on its being backed by gold or silver. For instance, on the earlier $5 bills was printed 5 silver dollars, promising to pay that much of silver in exchange for that currency note. The currency notes of different lands represented either gold or silver equal to the value mentioned on the currency. With the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Britain decided to withdraw gold from internal circulation, and other countries also broke the link with gold. The United States, however, kept the link to gold, and after the Second World War, the US dollar replaced the pound sterling as a key global currency. Other countries fixed their exchange rates against the dollar, the value of which remained defined in terms of gold. In the early 70s, the system of fixed exchange rates started to break down as a result of growing international inflation. Tempted by the promise of windfall profit and accounting razzle-dazzle, the United States abandoned the dollars linked with gold in 1971. Right from the time of the introduction of the currency notes, the system became prone to fraudulent activities. Since no one knew how much gold or silver a bank had in its vaults, it became easy for them to cheat the public by printing as much currency as they needed. That, in fact, became necessary since it was needed for survival in an interest-based system. Eventually, this became the monopoly of governments, which gave the false notion that they were printing currency in lieu of the gold and silver that they had in their exchequers. People continued to believe that the government held at least something as a security for the currency that they printed. This came to an end with the introduction of the fiat currency in 1971. Fiat money or fiat currency is money whose value is not derived from any intrinsic value or guarantee that it can be converted into a valuable commodity such as gold. Instead, it has value only by government order, that's fiat. Thus arose the situation in which governments could print as much currency as they wanted. Money became money just because the government said it was money. This introduction of fiat money can be considered the prime reason for the recent financial turmoil all over the world. When we factor in the reality that this right to mint the coin of the riyal that has been given over by politicians to private banking interests in the world, one can easily see the causes for the current global economic crisis and the inordinate influence just a few bankers hold over politicians and thus the nation. When that nation is United States, the influence is global. Virtually the entire world link their currency with the dollar. Agencies like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, controlled by America, gave loans to the so-called third world countries only in line with their GDP, that is gross domestic product growth, but not the United States. It could print currency without any such limitation. It has continued to print dollars in abundance and lend it to other nations. Thus, vast regions of the world became indebted to the United States. This directly led to the evolution of US-dominated world order. Any currency that would relink itself to gold or another precious resource would almost instantly break the economic chains that link other countries to the dollar. It is this fear that accompanies the emergency of China's Shanghai Cooperation Organization, who was said to be seeking to demote the dollar as the currency of international trade, or the recent panic that drove gold to record levels when it was said that oil would no longer be sold only based on the US dollar. For this reason, agencies like World Bank and IMF sanctioned loans to countries without getting any security from them. These agencies themselves and nations, they avail of the loans, know very well that the chances of full settlement of these loans are quite remote. But as long as the supremacy of the dollar and interest-based economic system prevails, other countries have had no option but to avail themselves of these loans. The debts of the developing countries are increasing at an exponential rate, doubling every decade. According to the statistics published by IMF, overall external debt of developing countries in the year 1980 was to the tune of $52.54 billion. It rises to $1,259.8 billion in 1990 and $2,140.6 billion in the year 2000. The interest and the repayable principal amount increased to $73.4 billion in 1980, $140.6 billion in 1990, and $337.8 billion in 2009. The United Nations laments that the amount could have been sufficient to save 21 million children of Africa from death due to starvation and to provide elementary education to 90 million female children. It is estimated that every day $700 million flows from developing countries to the developed countries. Unrestrained printing of currency and the interest-based economy led to the dollar dominating in the world financial markets and other nations taking the burn to it. The economic crisis that the United States is facing at this juncture is nothing but the natural consequences of its policy makers' own policies. It must have been their overconfidence that the supremacy of the dollar would continue forever and that the bubble of the stock market's boom would keep on growing that allowed them to create derivative notes worth $100 trillion to be transacted in the United States at the time when the overall GDP of the entire world was only $78.5 trillion. The current financial crisis has seriously eroded confidence in the Western world and has exposed the free market. Currently, when looking at alternatives, the Western world only sees remnants of socialism or some state intervention of economy as feasible and workable systems. If the OPEC nations and the developing countries join hands and work in a cohesive manner, they could put an end to the situation of supremacy of one particular currency and rescue the nations that suffering under the yokes of the external debt. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam sternly warned his followers against exploitation of any kind in commercial activities and to maintain transparency in all transactions. Gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt, like for like, equal for equal. and hand to hand. If the commodities differ, then you may sell as you wish, provided that the exchange is hand to hand. Sahih Muslim. This single command of the Prophet ﷺ is pregnant with the protection that will have prevented the kind of behind-the-scenes derivative markets. It is the duty of the scholars to learn more deeply about the legitimacy of the transactions made using fiat currency, which has no intrinsic value other than the value of its paper. In the light of the Islamic injunctions that all kinds of transactions should be transparent, we should examine how much the promises of the state that prints the currency should be believed. Is it possible to make 100% legitimate transactions with currencies that have no intrinsic value? Won't the system that carry out interest-free transactions be adversely affected when dealing with currencies that are perennially losing their value due to inflationary trends? Is it not unreasonable to expect men who have money to save humanity by suffering the losses incurred because of the depletion of the value of their money? These facts point out that the concept of fiat money is against the principles of financial transaction in Islam. The assurance of payment of their currency notes that nations other than America provided the holders of their currency is based on the value of the dollar. Whatever the dollar is worth as it relates to their currency, they will pay. The dollar itself, however, has no intrinsic value and is built on flimsy foundation. Why did America do this to itself? More accurately, why did the government of the people do this to the people? The immediate reason for the introduction of fiat money by the Nixon government was that Britain asked the US administration in 1971 to honor its commitment to issue gold for the dollars that the British government had. By detaching its currency from gold, that payout was ostensibly sidestepped. Yet even renowned Western economists have questioned the legitimacy of fiat currency. One of the most important economists and political philosophers of 20th century and the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974, Friedrich August Hayek, had found fault with the system of fiat currency. The renowned German economist Ludwig Lachmann, American intellectual and economist Murray Newton Rothbard, British economist Israel Moore Kirshner, Dr. Chario Lavoie, professor of economics in New York University, Peter J. Botke, the American economist and the editor-in-chief of Review of Austrian Economics, are but a few among the great economists of the world who have raised doubt about the elasticity of the fiat currency and advocated the use of a currency with intrinsic value. The Austrian economists are generally of the opinion that in monetary economics, fiat money is an intrinsically useless good as a means of payment, and that fiat currencies ultimately destroy themselves and their nations with hyperinflation. Former president candidate Son Ron Paul's The Case for Gold, which is based on the report of the US Gold Commission, laments the fact that many people in American public life argue for the quality theory of money and for a currency which is based on its equivalent worth of gold, but to no avail. Those who still maintain the capitalistic mindset and yet argue in favor of the quality theory of money uphold the belief that this would put an end to inflation and related problems. Inflation is a rise in the general level of prices of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. The prominent factors that cause inflation are that the money in circulation increases, the availability of commodity decreases, the value of money decreases, and the demand for commodities increases. If the governments can print currency only based on gold or silver that they actually have in their reserves, they would not be able to print currency indiscriminately. This itself would control inflation and decrease the burden of the common man. It would motivate countries to produce in excess of their needs and earn gold guaranteed money in return for the goods they export. It would lead to real economic advancement among people as opposed to the progress on paper that world is accustomed to. This is how the world can really put into practice the divine principle that prosperity can be attained through sincere efforts. Interest is one of the greatest bands of humanity. It necessitates suffering in this world and invites God's wrath here and in the hereafter. According to several ahadith in Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, interest is one of the 7 deadly sins. The Prophet ﷺ said, the receiver and the payer of interest, the one who records it, and the witnesses to the transaction have been cursed. He said, they all are alike in guilt. Sahih Muslim. The companions, Samura bin Jundub reported that the Prophet ﷺ saw in his dream a man standing in a river of blood. On the river bank, there stood a man who had stones with him. Each time the man in the river wanted to come out, the man with the stones would throw the stone into his mouth, which would drive him back to his position. The Prophet ﷺ asked about this man in the river. He was informed he was a man dealing in riba. Sahih al-Bukhari. Imagine that a person who lived during the time of Prophet Isa, Jesus alayhi salatu wasalam, borrowed 1 ounce of gold at the rate of 5% compound interest and was not able to repay it during his lifetime. If anyone in his lineage who is living today decides to repay it, he would have to give gold that weighs several times the weight of the earth. This example clearly shows how harmful and impractical the concept of usury is. The earliest bankers used to lend commodities, charging interest for them. The traders who borrowed, they had to repay their debt by returning more stock to the bankers. But the clever bankers knew that this business would not last for long. This was the reason they came up with the idea of representative money, the forerunner of today's currency. The people who borrowed never realized how dangerous it was going to be. The greatest obstacle to advancement for developing countries is the huge amount of interest that they have to pay every year for the dollars that they have borrowed for the World Bank and IMF. Heeding the words of advice voiced in favor of urbanization by the paid intellectuals of the West, most developing countries borrowed illogically and became victims of the debt trap. It is almost impossible to escape from the trap once you have fallen into it. Hope gives way to disappointment and frustration. Suffering, starvation, malnutrition, and erosion of moral values are the immediate consequences. It is as if they are falling into a bottomless pit, and there is no one to send a search party. The governments continue to borrow to survive and live another day. The fact that almost 7 million children killed every year due to starvation and malnutrition should open the eyes of everyone. The per capita income of the United States rose from $9,983 in 1960 to $34,100 in the year 2000, an increase of about 400%. Remember the dwindling per capita income of Somalia in the same period, $891 to $600. Similarly, the per capita income of Madagascar decreased from $1,013 to $800, and that of Zambia came down to $750 from $1,172. The total amount of debt of the developed countries in the year 2005 was $290 billion. The repayment amount for the year amounted to $57.3 billion. Will these countries ever be able to repay their debts in full? Any sane person knows that they will not forever. The politicians and rulers of the developed countries accumulate huge wealth through corruption, and their corporate houses reap rich harvests through shady business deals. At the same time, the vast majority of human beings in the world suffer under the yoke of heavy interest, burden laid on their feeble shoulders by the World Bank and the IMF, which are the agenda agencies of the developed countries. The first cause of the financial crisis is that has hit in the entire world is the interest system. This system, which was deployed by the developed nations in order to exploit and subjugate other countries, has now begun to boomerang on them. They themselves call the crisis by another name, Credit Crunch 2008. World Economic Outlook 1998, published by IMF, states that countries burdened heavily by excessive short-term borrowings will have to struggle greatly because of external and internal crises. The neoliberalists of the developed nations had never anticipated that the interest system that they had employed so successfully to exploit poor countries would one day turn its serpent's head against them and attack them so brutally. Yet, many still do not realize that they are succumbing to the same fate that any society based on interest is bound to suffer. The practices of the modern banking system are in conflict with the principles of Islam, as we have learned from our beloved scholar. Islam strictly prohibits taking or giving interest. It opposes exploitation in every and stands for fair and equitable dealings among all men. Interest-based economies depend on the growth of money for their survival and expansion. Money does not grow of its own accord. It has to reach the hands of efficient entrepreneurs to make it grow. But the present system induces the entrepreneur to borrow relentlessly to aid the growth of the banks. The modern banking system is organized on the basis of a fixed payment called interest. They take away a huge portion of the profit that is made as a result of the hard work of the entrepreneurs. Even if a business they have invested in turns at a loss, they consider none of their money at risk. They still demand payment regardless. But banks not only reel in huge profit from the ungodly amounts of interest they receive, they also resort to the creation of credit. This process begins with bank lending money out of primary deposits. Primary deposits are those deposits that are deposited in the bank. Through credit creation, banks are able to lend amounts much larger than the deposits that they have with them. For every $10 they have on hand, they can give out $90 they don't have, purely by the fabrication numbers in a computer. No paper money, nothing. And even this $10 may have come to them another bank that has created it through just $1 it received from another bank. Up the chain to the Federal Reserve, who simply charges the American government for it, who is investing it in the first place by fiat. You or I would be arrested for doing the same. The mad rush by banks to make maximum profits is said to be responsible for 2008 credit crisis. The prophecy made by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is reported to have said that intensity of ruin in store for those who increase their riches using interest will be in accordance with how much interest they received. Ibn Majah. Any sane person who understands that fiat money fiasco and credit creation scam, we are into turn real assets over to bankers who simply push buttons to make money out of thin air, will immediately begin searching for an interest-free system. And that will naturally take him or her to Islamic banking system. In the 1940s, discussions about the alternative banking system began. In the last 4 decades, it is the Islamic banking system that has emerged as the surprise, competitive and viable substitute for conventional banking. Elimination of riba, interest in all its forms is an important feature of Islamic financial system. Islamic banking is much more, however. At the heart of Islam is a sense of cooperation to help one another according to principles of goodness and piety. Islamic finance may be viewed as a form of ethical investing or lending, except that no loans are possible until they are interest-free. The Islamic financial system promotes the concept of participation in a transaction backed by real assets, utilizing funds at risk on a profit and loss sharing basis. This is by no means implies that investment with financial institutions are necessarily speculative. This can be minimized by careful investment policy, diversification of risk, and prudent management. The concept of profit and loss sharing in an enterprise as a basis of financial transactions in a progressive one, as it distinguished good performance from bad and mediocre. The Islamic banks have reportedly weathered the storm of the recent credit crisis very well. What is important is that this capacity is solely due to the humane nature of their investing and lending enterprise. It is Islam's principles of ethical wealth acquisition, disbursement, and gifting that have shielded the Islamic banks. Allah alone is the provider. Allah alone is the protector. In a world neck deep in the lethal interest system, the emergence of the Islamic banking system offers a handhold of hope. Yet, honesty and fear of God compels us to admit that many of these institutions do not, for various reasons, function in complete accord with the Islamic principles of blessed and moral wealth. They have their limitations, not least of which is the sheer viciousness of the league they operate in. They are forced to follow the same monetary policies evolved over the past few centuries, but they have been able to make some effort to make at least few changes in the present world economic system and show the world that there is a viable alternative that can be followed. The first major effort by these Islamic banks to add momentum to this change is to adopt a currency based on its equivalent value of gold, silver, platinum, copper, or similarly precious commodities. If the electronic money that is inevitably going to be widely used in the world in the near future is given the guarantee of a value of commodities, it will be a great beginning. In such a scenario, poor and developing countries will become primary beneficiaries of the Islamic banking system, and they will surely recognize this. It is high time that the world realize that the present economic system is based on myths and frauds. Let the nations that Allah has blessed with real commodity wealth then rethink their financial policies and invest in value-based commodities in order to be able to lead the world down the financial straight path. Then they will be able to rescue the developing countries from the debt, interest, boobies trap they have fallen into. The world is craving change, and the key to that change has been placed in the hands of the Muslims. The current crisis represents an opportunity for Muslims to present the Islamic economic system as an alternative. Are Muslims ready to transform themselves and the world using the knowledge that God, the All-Knowing, has entrusted to them? Are Muslims courageous enough to declare to the world, as Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam did to the Egyptian king facing catastrophic economic crisis? Through Yusuf alayhi salam must have appeared the most unlikely candidate to do so, a slave coming forth from the depth of the prison. قَالَ جِعَلْنِي عَلَىٰ خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ إِنِّي حَفِيظٌ عَلِيمٌ. Appoint me over the treasuries of the land. I am a good keeper and well-knowing. This is no utopian pipe dream. History itself has made it clear that Islam's economic solutions and directives are practical, based on the human welfare of the most vulnerable among us, and bound to universally better and terrible human condition. If people blessed by Allah with knowledge of the principal sources of revelation, numbers, power, wealth, and humility in the face of His coming judgment become ready for this, it will be the beginning of one of the great transformation of human history, for which man is surely due. It will be the beginning of an exploitation-free economic order and humane, locally driven globalization, returning man to his original state of collective stewardship and individual freedom. Yes, let we Muslims say, Ij'alni ala khaza'inil ardi inni hafizun alim. Appoint me over the treasuries of the land. I am a good keeper and well-knowing. As I told, this is a presentation on the Islamic analysis of the current financial crisis. So as I concluded, the key of transformation of the world is on the hands of the Muslims. So, as a message of this session of this conference, I would like to put forward that message to the Muslims of the world, to the rulers, Muslim rulers, as well as to the economists of the Muslim world. We have to have a currency monetary system, and more perfect Islamic banking system can be achieved through our own monetary system. Without a monetary system which is backed upon intrinsic commodities, these crises will never end up. So this is a message of the total session, the economic session, that is, the Islam has the solution for the crisis, but that solution is not superficial. We have to go to the roots and find solution to that. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallahu khaira, Sheikh M. Muhammad Akbar. We will now have time, inshallah, for the question and answer session. As previously, we have the 2 mics for the brothers and 1 for the sisters, which will alternate in between. So once we are ready, we'll have the first question from the brother's mic on the right-hand side.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. My name is Humayun. I am the student of finance. My question is about interest. That our holy religion, Islam, and the glorious Quran says that وَهِلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. It means that interest is haram. But according to the most of accounting books and finance books, as well as the financial analysts and bankers and I as a finance students, we don't think so. Because, sir, you know better that money losing its value from time to time. And these bankers and financial analysts says that this is not actually the interest. This is only the cost which we take from you because of the devaluation of money. So please comment on this, sir.
The problem of devaluation of money emerges from this fiat currency. That is why when I analyzed the present financial crisis, I first told that the base is on the monetary system. That monetary system lies on the fiat currency. That means a currency which doesn't have an intrinsic value. Money become money because governments say it is money. No value is there. So not only the devaluation, but the transactions, lending will not be possible in this system legitimately. Accurately will not be possible in this system. For instance, let me say a person from here who is working over here borrowed 1 million dinars from a merchant at Kuwait before Saddam's invasion. And he put up a very good business over here. And he utilized that business, that amount in that business. When Saddam Hussein called Kuwait, he withdrawn that money. He withdrawn that money for some days. So the money, that dinar, did not have any value for that duration. It was available in the market for silly cash, pennies. So, if the person who borrowed 1 million dinars at the time before Saddam's invasion, if he give back that amount at the time of the Saddam invasion, will it be legitimate? No. Why? The same money he got, he is giving back. Why not? Because it doesn't have any intrinsic value. So the basic problem lies on that. Inflationary trends are coming from that. All the money devaluation problems are emerging from that. So we have to have a monetary system which lies on something which has an intrinsic value. But the case of interest is different. Even though the monetary system is based on the fiat currency, interest is not permissible because it is against the laws of nature. That is why Allah prohibited it. Money is for what? What is the purpose of money? To buy goods, is it not? For the transaction of goods, money is necessary. So the laws of the goods should be suitable for money. Laws of goods should be suitable for money. What is the law of good? Third law of thermodynamics. No goods will grow itself. No goods will grow itself. It may deteriorate, but it will not expand. So money, the law of that those goods should be suitable for the money. But in the interest system, it is not suitable. It's not suitable. Even though we are thinking on the financial, capitalistic financial system and financial economics, it is against the law of nature. And in Islam, it is prohibited also.
Jazakallahu khaira. We'll have the next question from the sister's mic.
This is a question from a sister. She says, why some scholars or students of knowledge follow the opinion that it is permissible to apply for a riba-based home loan if it is your first home or in a non-Muslim country where halal loan is not payable. Aren't they supposed to be patient and just rent house instead of engaging in riba?
Why some scholars say that interest system in a non-Muslim country is halal? It has to be asked to those scholars. Nowhere in Islam riba is allowed. As we learned from our scholar talk before, and from the Quran itself, chapter number 2, verse number 275. We heard the recitation at the introduction of this session. Riba is haram, even though he is in a non-Muslim country or in a Muslim country. So, we cannot justify riba in any circumstances. Riba, Muslims should be away from riba related activities. Then how could we get loans? That's the question. And Muslim societies should have something for assisting people who is backward in those fields. That's the only solution which is applicable in the non-Muslim countries.
The next question from the brother's mic on the left.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Imam Akbar. In fact, we talk about Islamic banking system, Islamic financial institutions, whereas in reality, I think there is no difference between conventional banking system and the commercial banking system, except the transposition of word. Instead of interest or riba, it is profit rate. Instead of post-import finance, it is murabbaha. And instead of overdraft facility, it is tawruk. So in reality, I am experiencing this, and also I would like to add that there is profit rate instead of interest, but there is no loss rate in Islamic banking system. So in this juncture, do you think that Islamic banking system is a substitute for the conventional or the commercial banking system? Thank you.
Question is Islamic banking system do I think that is Islamic banking system a substitute for commercial banking system? As I told, Islamic banking system prevailing in the all over the world has its own limitations, because all the banking systems are based on the monetary policy, monetary economics prevailing in the world. So the root is in the monetary policy prevailing in the world. So without changing that, Islamic banking system will have some problems like our brother told. But it is not as similar as commercial banking system. In Quran itself it is said Allah allowed trade and prohibited riba. What's the difference between that? In trade also, we are selling something, we are getting profit. Getting profit and loss, it is there in trade. But Allah says in the same ayah that Allah prohibited riba and trade. So, Islamic banking system, as the former speaker, he's an expert in Islamic banking system. You might, if you would have asked this question to him, it would be better because he is very much expertise in that system. So, even though the present banking, Islamic banking system has its own limitations, it is not based on riba. It is not based on riba. That's the main difference between.
We'll have the next question from the sister's mic. If we don't have anybody there, I can't actually see from here. We'll go to the front mic for the brothers.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My question is, in the current situation in the world today, what type of investments can we make that would be 100% halal in the eyes of Allah?
In the eyes of Allah, what are the types of investments we can make that is 100% halal? All the investment except there is an involvement of riba and exploitation. No speculation business is allowed. No exploitation is allowed. All the transactions should be transparent. That's the only thing. No riba should come into the business. That's the only thing. You can do any business without having this.
Okay, inshallah, we'll have the next question from the sister's mic.
It's regarding the Islamic insurance. The sister wants to know what's the position of insurance, life insurance in Islam, and is there any halal insurance or Islamic insurance?
What's the position of life insurance in Islam? Is there any halal insurance in Islam? Insurance involved in riba. Most of the insurance companies in the secular world is involved in riba activities. Life insurance as well as other insurances. So the transactions with riba, with interest, in the name of insurance or in the name of anything else, it's haram. It is not allowed. But a social security system is allowed. That is what Islamic insurance is, as far as I know. Islamic insurance is an insurance. It doesn't involve in any riba connected activities. It is a social security system collecting money from various people, from a lot of people on a contract that if a person meet any accident or anything, he will be paid this much of amount. That is the basis of Islamic insurance system. That is a social security system without in connection with riba is halal. All other insurance which are connected with riba system is not allowed.
Jazakumullahu khaira. That is all the time that we do have for the question and answer session. So may Allah reward our dear Sheikh M. Muhammad Akbar. Jazakallahu khaira.
Interest is one of the greatest bands of humanity. the Great Depression of 1927, Black Swan event of 1987, and dot-com crisis of 2000 are all major economic crises that hurt the world economy. False credit ratings for the big corporations, boom and collapse of the shadow banking system, and a commodity bubble are the causes of the current financial crisis.